Welcome everyone to the last of the Vermont Archaeological Society's remote presentations that we've been hosting as part of Vermont Archaeology Month. If you're joining us from Vermont, good evening, and if you're here from Hong Kong, good morning. I'm so pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Peter Cobb, who is currently an assistant professor at the University of Hong Kong, where he teaches courses in archaeology, ancient history, and digital humanities. Dr. Cobb received his undergraduate degree from Dartmouth College, so this is a bit of a homecoming, albeit a virtual one. Very nice, got the merchandise. Dr. Cobb's research focuses on understanding the lived experiences and mobilities of people in the past through investigations of ancient ceramics and landscapes. He also experiments with advanced digital methods for archaeological field recording and analysis, including with 3D, spatial, and shaped data. Each summer, he leads an archaeological field school in the South Caucasus as part of the Ararat Plane Southeast Archaeological Project, a 5-year international collaboration between the University of Hong Kong and the Institute for Archaeology and Ethnography of Armenia. The project engages students from East Asia in a variety of archaeological methods to better understand life and mobility in the area during the Late Bronze Age and medieval periods, as well as the region's relationship to the cultural developments that were taking place across the ancient Near East during those times. So with that, I'd like to turn your monitors over to Dr. Cobb so that we can hear more about this project and the digital experiments that he and his students have been undertaking.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and share this screen. So I'm hoping you can see my PowerPoint now. Good, all right. So today, obviously, I'm going to talk, hopefully briefly, although I do have a tendency, like any professor, to run on, but hopefully briefly chat about our project at a very high level to introduce it to a new audience, and then hopefully we can have some more continuing our discussion about this topic. Obviously, this is a kind of a sad time for the world, but also especially for Armenia in the last couple of days. There's new outbreak of hostilities between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and we all hope, of course, that there can be a quick ceasefire and that peace can return to the region over the long run. All right, so first thing that I wanted to chat about was maybe the question of, besides Dartmouth, why I'm interested in talking to the Vermont Archaeological Society. And so the reason is because there's another university I attended, but is not on my official resume, and that's the University of Vermont, which I attended for preschool. So I was born in Burlington and lived in Shelburne, and I can in fact probably trace my interest in the material past to my visits to the Shelburne Museum, especially the Ticonderoga and the one-room schoolhouse, which I very, very fondly remember, as well as visits to Shelburne Farms. So we do our project in Armenia, which is this small country right to the sort of between Turkey and Iran and in Russia, as part of the South Caucasus region. It's important for a lot of history because, of course, it's in the middle of everything, I like to say. We're part of the ancient Near East, so a lot of the places that people are familiar with, Mesopotamia, Persia, Anatolia. We are kind of at the northern, where we're doing our research at the northern part, sort of in the mountain ranges north of Mesopotamia. So we have interactions that we're trying to study with all the surrounding regions. It's also really important that we're kind of in the middle of a lot of regions even today. And this is partially why there is violence in the region, because it's always been a kind of a border and contested region for the last couple hundred years between Turkey and Russia, for example, which is leading into what we see today. But you can go back to the Roman period and see that this is the border between Rome, the Roman Empire, and the Persian Empire as well. So this is common for this region. If we zoom into the Caucasus, the South Caucasus here, we can kind of see that we're between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. The Caucasus, famous Caucasus mountain ranges is to our north at the edge of Georgia and Azerbaijan. What's interesting from a geographical perspective is that there are these two main rivers, Kura and the Aras or Araxes River that both run into the Caspian Sea. And so along these rivers, we do find a lot of the ancient civilizations that we're sort of studying, a lot of the settlements. Specifically for us, we're focused on the Araxes River Valley. And within Armenia, we're focused on a sort of plain that can be called the Ararat, that's called the Ararat Plane. A lot of the biggest archaeological sites are found in this sort of main part of the plain near the modern capital city and the largest city of Armenia today, Yerevan. So this has always been a place for human settlement. It's the fertile region of Armenia today. It's where all the agriculture is happening. And Gyumri, right at the kind of northern edge, is kind of on the is the second largest city in Armenia. So you can see that this continues to be the place where human habitation is easiest. And if you go down here to the southeast part, that's where we're kind of studying one of these offshoot river valleys. This is our view from the site, from our site. And so we're looking out over the Ararat Plain, and this is Mount Ararat. So often when I've sort of interfaced with the public, especially in the United States, I've been working in Turkey for many years, and now in Armenia. And so people will ask me about Mount Ararat because that is a known sort of toponym in the general public. And now, even though I was working in Turkey for a long time, I was working very far away from this on the west coast of Turkey. Now I am looking at Mount Ararat, and it is within Turkey, though. This is the actual border between Turkey and Armenia, so you can't go there from Armenia directly. But it has a major impact on the consciousness of the Armenian population today, and we assume the people who lived here in the past, because it is such a stark landmark on the landscape. But we are focused on the archaeology of a river valley on the side of the Ararat Plain across from Mount Ararat. So this picture, this Google Earth image is taken in this direction, basically looking in this direction with this red arrow. And what it is it's looking from the Ararat Plain up into the Gerem mountain range. And this is we're basically seeing the city of Ararat here, which is marked on the map. Our main focus is a small town called Vedi, within this what we call the Vedi River Valley. So there's actually a tributary to the Araxes River that runs down into the Araxes River here, which is the Vedi River Valley. And so what we really want to focus on is this intersection between a wide fertile plain and the resource-rich mountain range behind it. So there's a lot of metals up here that have always been of interest to miners. There's forests, timber, but the main habitation tends to happen along this interface between the plain and the mountains, including at Vedi. But you can see all of these kind of modern towns along the valley as well. And so we want to understand human life throughout multiple time periods going up into this river valley. That's our main focus here. Here's another way to look at it for the topographic map. This is the river valley, essentially. This is the Vedi River Valley. This has a wide mouth out onto the plain, and then it goes back into multiple kind of offshoot valleys to it. And so the modern road actually will take you up over the mountains this way through this kind of southern path. And I suspect that we're going to find a lot of information about the ancient pathways to go up into this area through this kind of northeast pass as well. The Lake Savannah is one of the largest inland freshwater lakes in Eurasia. And it also is surrounded by a lot of mineral resources. So there's gold mining going on today. There's probably copper mining going on today. And this is true even 3,000 years ago. So this is an important region to get to in order to get resources. And so we believe that potentially we are one of the routes coming from the kind of normal transportation route up into the Lake Savannah area through our valley. And it's thought that together with the Arpa River Valley and the Uragas River, that we are potentially even part of things like the Silk Road in a sort of a small offshoot of the larger Silk Road that connects where I am today in East Asia with this part of Central Europe and Asia, and then over into Europe. Our project, therefore, we call the Ararat Plane Southeast Archaeological Project because it's on the southeast corner of the Ararat Plane. We began our first field season in 2019. We expected to do our second field season this summer. Unfortunately, that was, of course, canceled. But we have an initial 5-year agreement with the Armenian government and with our close partnership with the Armenians to work there until 2023, as well as support from the Hong Kong government to do this. The main area that the sort of main urban area today, or town area, let's say, is Vedi, right at the mouth of the river valley. We have a strong partnership with the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography of the National Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Armenia. And we work together with Boris and Arthur really closely. They're great collaborators and have really supportive and great people and very knowledgeable about the past in archaeology. We're also supported with a lot of help from Heike Zizbekian, who's our project coordinator and a good friend, who is always helping us with things in the country to make sure that things run smoothly. The overall research goals, sort of broad level research goals for this project, which since we just started, are still, we're going to be iterating as we get more data, trying to determine what we can answer and developing new questions in the coming 5 years in this kind of initial phase of work, which we hope will continue into future phases. First and foremost, to fill a gap in our knowledge about this area of the South Caucasus. The main part of the Ararat Plain between Yerevan and Gyumri, which I showed on the map, that has really seen even 100 of years of archaeological work, especially with support of Russian scientists in the 20th century. But the southeast part has seen a lot less attention. And so it's kind of a new area for us to explore. We want to specifically examine this idea of life and mobility at this plain-mountain intersection. We got this wide plain, we got these mountain ranges up behind us, and this is some sort of a transportation corridor to get up into the mountains. In this kind of a place, we're seeing really quick transitions in terms of the climate and the terrain. And so what can we sort of understand about the past use of landscape, of agriculture, of pastoralism? What can we understand about life if we are comparing kind of these low-lying places with the surrounding upper regions? That's kind of one of our driving factors. We also are going to see, as I present today, that the landscape has been militarized in the late Bronze Age and then remilitarized especially in the medieval period and probably other periods as well. And so we want to understand why that was and what the shape of that militarization looks like. As mentioned before, I'm interested in digital humanities projects and data collection, analysis, and sharing. So we're doing a lot of experiments with that together with some engineering faculties here at HKU and across the world. And of course, we want to engage multiple publics in our cultural heritage projects. So it becomes sort of easier for me to engage with East Asian community, with people from China and Hong Kong, to actually come to Armenia to get to know more about this region, which is not a region that has a long history of public knowledge in this part of the world. So it's kind of exciting. Obviously, we want to engage with the Armenian public, but also, I have opportunities to engage with, let's say, American public as well. So we're excited about this. We use kind of typical methodologies within the Near Eastern context, and I would be kind of curious to know how these kind of map onto New England. But basically, one of the things we'll do is use the remote sensing data, the satellite imagery, to try and find potential places to look for sites. And at the same time, we will then sort of target specific areas to do systematic survey. We'll go out and walk in these parallel lines and try and record everything that we find on the ground. So we did this in 2019. We went out 6 days and we were able to actually identify 5 potential new sites across the valley. What's interesting is that in this part of the world in general, through my experience, the easiest place to find sites is at the direct intersection between the flat plain and the mountain ranges, so in the kind of foothills. So you'll notice that all of these sites, partially because this is where I looked, are at that intersection between the mountains and the foothills. It's also very difficult to find sites on the floodplain because they get covered over. And in the mountains, we don't tend to find as many sites. Probably just the access was a little bit more difficult. So this is the best place to find sites, and we did in fact find multiple sites there. We are experimenting with trying to precisely locate not just the sites, but objects on the sites, and every object that we find during survey using some new GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite Systems technology. So this was an early affordable version of differential GNSS that we were able to take out to the field in 2018 and 2019. We put together an Android app that would allow us to map out every piece of pottery or every piece of architecture that we found so that we could capture a photograph of that information, and we would be able to put together a precise map. Ideally, this kind of technology would actually give you centimeter level precision if you use it in the differential configuration. So that's our kind of long-term goal, is to know within a few centimeters where an individual piece of pottery was found on the ground. And so we're still sort of developing this technology. One of the advantages of working in Armenia versus my experience in Turkey is that you can actually do test excavations of small sites that you find during survey. So up the valley, so Vedi is down here, but if you sort of head up the valley, the next major modern township, if you will, is Ortzedzor. And we found along the main road here, on top of this mound, we found a little bit of evidence of archaeology up here. So it's an important site to kind of control traffic through the valley. So it was not a surprise to find some evidence of archaeology up here. So this is the site, and we had permission to be able to do a quick test excavation to talk about that site. So this is looking the other direction, up the valley towards the modern township of Ortzedzor. And so I found the remains of a wall here. You can just barely make out the stones at the edge of a wall. So we did a 1 by 1 meter excavation. And here's that edge of the wall that I had found above the surface. We found only one course of the wall below the surface. So there wasn't much remaining. And as we dug through here, we found pottery, but the only thing we found in situ was this storage jar base, which was sitting right here. Looked like it was buried. It looks like its knobby foot was kind of buried in the sand so that it would stand upright against the wall, probably for storing some sort of maybe grain or grapes or water for this, what may be a kind of a small fortification, basically. This pottery looks to be medieval to me, and we're continuing our study of that, but we think it's around 1200 CE. So we did that, but our main focus of the project is going to be the main site of the region where we're carrying out more intensive excavations, bigger excavations. And if you look at the topographic map and kind of take a look at the valley floor here, I think it will be pretty easy for any of you with archaeological experience to figure out where the sort of main site of the valley is going to be. And so that is right there. It's an obvious spot of elevation within the middle of the river valley, and therefore has a very strategic place in controlling the traffic through the site. And this is what the site looks like from the northeast. So we're looking out over, you can just barely make out Mount Ararat in the background here. This is the Ararat Plane over here, and if you to your left would be going up into the Vedi River Valley. The site itself has a really interesting shape. It's a natural rock outcrop. About at least 100 meters tall here above the surrounding floodplain. It's kind of shaped like a door wedge. So if you want to hold your door open and you stick that sort of plastic wedge in there, basically that's the shape that one of my volunteers realized recently. And it's kind of got a triangular shape if you look at it from the top. So we'll take a couple more look at a couple more sides of this. We believe that one of the main periods of occupation that's of interest to my research is the late Bronze Age of the second millennium and early Iron Age of the early first millennium BC, which is a really interesting time period in the ancient Near East. Here's a couple more pictures. So sort of zooming in, You can see that it slopes down very gently, very regularly to the floodplain in the western side, and the eastern side is the high side. This side that we're looking at is a very sharp cliff, and so you would die if you fell off of this side. So it's very easy to defend. You can see it if we kind of move around to looking at the east side now. You can see the cliff face on this side. On the south side of the hill, it's a little bit more gentle. In fact, we can drive our vehicle up to the top on this side. So this would need a little bit more help in terms of defensive situation. And here, if we continue around, you're now looking at the south side. This is the road we actually drive the truck up. There's a little bit of a cliff face here to protect this side. But again, the main sort of interface for the plane is actually on the west side. If you continue down, it slopes down to the plane, a little bit hard to see from this angle. So we took out the drone to do a nice map of it. And this is what it looks like from the top. So that sharp cliff face on the northeast side, sloping down to the plain where this is kind of the intersection with the plain, but you can gently sort of hike up the middle of the site, going up and up and up until you reach the top here at what we'll call the citadel. South side, you can kind of see it's a little bit more gentle on this side. And there's a modern, probably cement factory kind of eating away at the site on this side as well, unfortunately. Just to give you one more sense of the site, here's our drone video. So you're looking east here out over the Ararat Plane to the Mount Ararat. This is the south ridge, which you can see is quite high. Keep an eye on the rubble ruins here. This is looks like a wall. You can see the wall face down there. We're looking south as the valley is kind of opening up. You've got the mountains to the south side, little hills within the valley itself, but a lot of agricultural land. As we start to spin over to the east side, you're looking up the Vedi River Valley towards Tzor here. That's the other site we were talking about. But you can see the mountains now to the east. You can see the wall in the front here is quite clear now, the rubble from the wall. As we start to look north, we see that the other side is also a lot of mountainous terrain up there. Here's the south cliff face of the site. And now you can start to look down the middle of this wedge shape, looking at the north cliff over here, but then you can look straight down into the plain. It kind of slopes down, has basically has kind of a bowed aspect in the middle. And we're looking back to the west at the Ararat Plane here. And there's one of our trenches. We'll talk about that in a second. So hopefully that gives us some sense of the site. All right, so basically what's interesting about the site from the top is that it's divided into basically three sections. Here we have a lower or outer fortification wall. So because this is the easy way to approach, they figured they had to defend this approach, whereas of course the north face, this is naturally defended, and the south face is somewhat naturally defended as well. They actually built a wall to enclose this whole area with a little potential tower here at a high point in the middle. Then there's the second wall we were seeing in the drone footage, which is going to contain an upper citadel. So this is the place where we appear to have the most human activity. This is some sort of lower shelf, which we were going to investigate this summer, but we didn't go yet, so we will investigate that next summer. If we zoom in on the outer lower wall, you can see this is the same image, drone image as before. This is what it looks like on the ground, looking down at it. So very nice wall face in the front with a rubble core about 2.75 meters wide, preserved to roughly about 2 meters at its highest point in some places, though it was probably much taller in antiquity. But it has a very nice, well done face on it. These rocks are probably just from the natural rock, just sort of shaved off of this kind of layered rock that is on the surface itself. And we believe that the initial use of this wall is somewhere around 3,000 years old, but we're still investigating. We excavated 3 areas in 2019 season with these red rectangles that you can see here. We wanted to understand what was going on between the 2 walls. So we had a trench here, which was looking at some potential architecture on the surface. We wanted to then understand better what was going on within the citadel. So we put a trench here that we were looking at maybe the split between a northern part of the citadel and a southern part of the citadel. And then this trench here is very important because it is right up against potentially or on top of the city wall that you can see here. And so this has some good deep stratigraphy that we intend to continue to investigate in future years to get a full stratigraphic sequence. So here are some of my students from Hong Kong starting to excavate the trench in the middle of the citadel. There was a small wall here. This trench was not very deep and is a little difficult to tell what's going on, and it may be evidence from the later occupation from the medieval period. So we were using a sieve at the edge of the site to find all the artifacts. The main trench, as I mentioned before, is this one up against the city wall. And this is kind of what the excavation looked like halfway through the season, let's say, or towards the end of the season. We were coming down on some medieval walls up here, but you can also see these very large stones, which appear to me to have been part of the main city wall. So a little bit unclear still because we only had 16 days in 2019, so we didn't get that deep. A little unclear to me still how this ties into everything, but we hope to expand this trench in 2021 summer to further understand it. As we're digging, we are directly connected to the internet. There's good cell reception here, and we hope to maybe even investigate getting an internet connection directly to this site because Veti, the town, is right below us. So we have the potential to get a strong internet connection here. And we're doing all of our work on a virtual desktop server so that all of our data is immediately uploaded to the internet and centralized so that in a live data store so that anybody within the project ecosystem can see exactly what's going on at the field at any time. So we're doing a little bit of recording through a journal and some basic data, and then a lot of photography and a lot of 3D modeling within the site. So this is a completely digital project. This was an interesting thing that we found in top of that trench. A huge pithos that you can see here. We believe this is of medieval date, so around 1200 CE, about 800 years old. Seems to be in situ, was crushed. We took samples from inside that we hope to do some analysis on when we get back to Armenia. Some potential sort of architecture around it, but this is very unclear. But very solid evidence for economic activity here during the medieval period. Here's just a very brief overview of kind of what some of our ceramics look like. Probably a lot of these are medieval, some of it probably as well late Bronze Age. Lots of pithos fragments, so lots of storage vessel fragments. We have some interesting decoration like this wavy line thing. This is very common. We don't have much, if at all, painted pottery. But there's a lot of incised or impressed decorations, often around the edges of the pottery. We also found this, which is a bulla. That is a piece of clay that was very, very small. You can see this is next to a centimeter scale. A piece of clay that was put onto what looks like a rolled piece of paper, like a scroll, that had perhaps a ribbon running through the clay to seal a letter that was sent to this site. And then somebody they had a ring with a little impression on it, and they impressed their ring into the clay before they sent it so that they could authenticate that it was sent from them. This is kind of the way that people are signing things in the ancient Near East. This and cylinder seals, a different kind of sealing system. I have an undergraduate student who's working on researching this right now, and we believe that this is a military saint depicted on the picture, although the impression is a little unclear. But that a military saint would be a common motif that we see in the Byzantine Empire during the medieval period around 11th century, 12th century as well. So we think we have some potential evidence for communications, maybe not all the way to the Byzantine Empire from here, but of a related nature during the medieval period. So we are doing a lot with photogrammetry, which I guess a lot of you heard, or probably a lot of you are working with it. So you're familiar with the technology. We are taking photogrammetric models at the end of each time we dig a context. And the goal with that is to be able to do volumetric context modeling. So I was part of a project in Turkey where we were kind of working on this a couple years ago. And what you do basically is you have your top surface, your bottom surface of a context. So this is kind of a grain silo made of stone here. And as we dug it, of course, we kind of did it by layers based on, in the Near East, it's not uncommon to change your context based on just things you see in the ground. Maybe a change in the color of soil, maybe maybe a set of rocks that might mean some sort of new layer within the silo here, for example. And so in this case, we had dug it in 1, 2, 3, 4 different contexts. And every time we finished a context, we would sweep up, do the photogrammetric model, and end the context that way. And what this gives us is the ability to create a volumetric model of each context, starting from the top and heading down. One thing that's interesting is that we ended up with these kind of wisps at the top. And this was, of course, from continued cleaning. And so when you're cleaning the edges of the silo, the dirt is falling out. And that means that you are in a new context, even though you may knock pottery out from the wall here, it becomes part of this context. So the 3D, the digital, does not let you sort of hide as the archaeologist in terms of your methodology. It really records everything very precisely. And what these models will allow us to do is to talk about the exact provenience of each object within the stratigraphic layer within this feature, and we can of course put together the sort of rebuild the context and the excavation through 3D models that sort of puzzle together. And so we're hoping to do this with the Armenia example as well. So it's a fun social event for the students as we wash our pottery in the afternoon and study the pottery and the decorations on the pottery and try and puzzle some of it back together. I actually worked with Dartmouth students a few years ago to try and develop some new technologies to do scanning of ceramics. So some undergraduates put together this project where we would put a ceramic in this device here, and we had 3 cameras, and the whole thing was supposed to be automated. Then in about 3 minutes, you could do a full photogrammetric model of the sherds. We weren't able to get this particular device to work in the field, of course, field situations being different than lab situations. But it forms the basis for some of the new experiments I'm doing with HKU archaeologists in order to speed up our 3D modeling of ceramics so that we can build these 3D models of individual ceramics in order to do automated morphometric analysis of shapes and do the classifications and things like that. And Jesse, the PhD student, is also working on trying to use machine learning to understand some of the fabrics based on the visual aspects so that we can categorize everything automatically across all of our ceramics so that we can maybe take a big data approach to studying our ceramics. So this is kind of the structure of what my field project looks like. We've got the field work for data collection is kind of the foundation of my work. And then I have sort of 4 main areas of the project. One is the field school itself, where I take the Hong Kong students to Armenia. There's obviously the object and spatial analysis to understand the past, the digital humanities experimentation, and then this idea of knowledge exchange, what we call here, what you would call public engagement in the United States, where we had a film crew come out the first year to video us, and we're trying to put together some documentaries about what it means to do archaeology on a day-to-day basis. And of course, at the top of this is this idea of publishing all of our results. This was the team in 2019. All the orange ones are HKU students. And Ada was from Turkey, a Turkish student. Haik was our coordinator. Zichen is from mainland. He's also now a graduate student with me here at HKU. Elvan, my wife, is the assistant director, and our daughter is the mascot. So the students also had a chance to do some experimental archaeology. We actually went out with an expert to take some clay from the landscape, make some clay and make some pottery, and then these were fired. Unfortunately, they all burst in the kiln, so we got to work on our clay recipes, but we hope to continue doing these kind of experiments in the future. We're also planning to engage Armenian children in our project by bringing them out to the site through a partnership with Ania Avgadnia of the National Museum of the National Gallery of Armenia. So we'll hopefully do that next summer, where the students will actually come out to the site, and our HKU students will get to teach them about archaeology. And of course, we're very interested in figuring out ways that we can use virtual and augmented reality to engage students and the public in our site. We've had a project of trying to reconstruct the city wall on our drone model, and we're hoping to get over to the library soon to view that in the HoloLens or other virtual reality devices. And so this is kind of the fun that the students had last year, and we hope that we will be able to do this again in 21-21. They cook together, they live together. There's lots of good agriculture in this area. And of course, the perils of traffic in Armenia sometimes. Finally, I'd just like to invite you all, especially since my colleague Sarah is here as well, invite you all to consider to submit to our journal, Advances in Archaeological Practice, which is a Society of American Archaeology journal. We're definitely looking for submissions from all types of archaeologists, people who work in CRM, volunteers, anybody who's working on interesting new ways that we can do things in the field. So thank you so much for listening to this talk, and thank you to our supporters. Visit our website. This picture, it turns out that the young people of Hong Kong do not have experience climbing trees. And so I found a very interesting, I learned a very interesting thing in 2019, that as a Vermonter, I grew up just naturally knowing how to climb trees. And I always thought that that was something that people just knew how to do. Well, it turns out that if you haven't done it as a child, it's a learned skill. And so it was very interesting to see my Hong Kong students try and learn how to climb a tree in Armenia. And a little bit nerve-wracking too when they tried to get down, but everybody survived. And I think they had a very unique experience during that. So with that, I would love to open up to any questions or discussions, and I will open up the sort of people-to-people things again. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Those pictures are amazing. That looks like a beautiful site to work on. I'm very envious of that. I guess.
Well, you guys have it pretty good over in Vermont too.
The soil is better in Armenia.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
That's what I was kind of curious about. I mean, I have a couple of questions, but one of them, I was just curious, like what level are you digging to there? Like, what's the soil like? Things like that, because it does look completely different from my experiences.
Yeah, let me see if I can just go to a picture of some soil real quick here. The soil is in general in the Middle East it's relatively dry. When I worked in Turkey and when I've worked in Armenia. This particular site though is extremely dusty. So you'll see she's wearing a dust mask, and in fact I think everybody should be wearing a dust mask on this site because it's an extremely dusty site. So in Turkey where I've worked, it's more like sandy, but here literally, when they're doing the shaking out of the materials, there'll be a big dust cloud that comes out after it. So it's extremely dry, and so I haven't actually dug in a sort of wet climate or a wetter climate, so I'm actually not familiar with the kind of more dirt aspect. But when you dig in this kind of a dry soil, it's pretty easy. I mean, it chops up quite nicely. It breaks into small chunks and into sand. And so we spend most of our time sweeping, actually. So you see the brush here. And so we really have to do a lot of sweeping just to see things. But getting through it, you can see the kind of stratigraphy here is pretty easy with a pick and with a trowel. It holds together enough so that if you can see that the bulks are pretty intact here. So that's not much of an issue for us. Yeah, what else can I talk about the soil?
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious, like how, what level are you finding artifacts in? Is it throughout, or is there a certain layer you're looking to get to?
Yeah, throughout. I mean, on the surface, there's just tons of stuff. When you get a site like this, it's just because it's been inhabited for so long, there's just stuff everywhere. So that's when we're doing surface survey. If we start to find pottery, we know we have something buried underneath. I mean, so I don't know exactly how that applies to the American situation, but for the Middle East, because the sites are occupied for so long with so many different layers, you're always going to find we have a lot of reliability in the surface material. And so even when we're digging in this trench, you can see that there's kind of a layer of kind of like small stones here, basically with dirt on the top and dirt on the bottom. And there was a small sort of roughly built wall of rather large blocks here that was basically at the surface. I mean, you could see some of the rocks, and as we dug, we uncovered most of them. And so there's certainly stuff right next to the surface, but you can see this is down about, I think, a meter and a half to the bottom of this. This is about as deep as we got last year, a meter and a half. And we're still in medieval layers. And so this is like, 800 years old. They put this on the surface. Below us, maybe 1, 2, probably at least 2 meters, maybe more. We're going to get down into earlier periods. There may be some Roman period stuff around 0. There's certainly stuff from the early Iron Age and late Bronze Age about 3,000 years ago. There's evidence for the early Bronze Age, which is about 5,000 years ago, and perhaps even earlier. And so it will be a kind of somewhat continuous sequence with these gaps. Hopefully we find more places on the site where there is more continuous evidence. I would love to have a pretty continuous sequence and to find evidence of Roman period occupation, of Middle Bronze Age occupation, which would be about 4,000 years ago, of Chalcolithic 6,000 years ago. It would be incredible to be able to find this kind of a sequence, but there's just a lot of stuff. I mean, it's an intensively, everywhere in the Near East is pretty intensively occupied.
Thank you.
I guess going off of talking about soil, I was wondering how
Yeah.
that impacted the photogrammetry, to have like those layers kind of filtering down or things sliding into your units. How did you problem solve with that?
Good. Yes. That's something to think about. In some senses, we just kind of go with it, because the soil does kind of stay together, and it doesn't rain during this period. We're able to have a kind of stable environment so that when we dig from one layer to the next, especially if you have rocks around the edges, of course, you do have some stability in keeping the unit intact, if you will. But again, if we're cleaning on the edges here, then some of the dust is going to fall off, and it will sort of impact our stratigraphy to a certain extent, which we've never really captured that before. It's always been happening, but we've never really captured it before. I think that the complexity is the real challenge here. You can see that the reason why we stopped to make this the top of the next context was because there were some stones here where we had a couple of them visible through the initial surface, but then we dug the dirt from both sides of it, and we dug down and we realized it's not really continuing below it. So you can see they went a little bit lower than this kind of rock layer here. And once they realized that there was maybe no other layer below, they said, okay, well, this doesn't appear to be something organized by a human. Maybe these rocks fell in here. Maybe it was a slight organization. Maybe it wasn't really a big effort. Maybe it's from a later or higher wall or something like that. So that's when they stopped. So to some extent, we're just looking for whatever changes that we see in order to close a context, to end a context, and open a new context. But to some extent, you don't always know, obviously, with any archaeology, you don't always know what you're digging through until you've removed it. But this kind of a single, what would be called kind of in the English context, a single context system, where you're sort of having a volumetric context, has worked well in the ancient Near East, for over a century, let's say, of archaeological practice. And so I think that, and it works pretty well for us. You just have to kind of keep an eye on what you're digging, and expect that later on you're going to recognize something that you didn't see before. But for example, a pithos itself, the actual pithos is a context in our system. We actually 3D model the pithos in situ. So we dig out the dirt, we do a photogrammetric model, we remove the the pithos, the fragments. Then we do another photogrammetric model. In fact, that was one of our last contexts in 2019. And then the volume that's between those surfaces should be the actual pithos. So we should have an exact model of the pithos volumetric, the actual material, the clay of the pithos volumetrically, as our context when we put this thing back together in that kind of 3D puzzling. So it's really about just keeping an eye on when things change, looking for those rock alignments. Everything is about rock alignments. Any changes in color, soil, don't know if I have a picture of it here, but the soil around here, it's a little hard to see in this photograph, is a little bit more red than the soil above it or the soil to the side. And so is that things come, is that the pottery sort of disintegrating, a red kind of pottery disintegrating, or is that something different about the soil that's holding this in? But we definitely saw it. I mean, it's very visible. And so that helps us to know to change context at that point. Does that kind of get at your question?
Yes, definitely. And that's great to
Okay.
hear too about like how you managed to 3D sort of model the inner and then like what remained from the pithos. So yeah, that's really innovative. Thank you.
David, I think you're on mute.
Still.
Better?
Yes.
I had a question more related to scale. That if you're looking at mobility along that interface between the plain and the mountains, are you going to use some proxy to see mobility, like the materials that are in the sites, or are you going to operate at a huge scale and be able to have a sample size that runs for miles? And I wasn't quite sure how you were going to get at that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something that we kind of, let's say we're experimenting with that. Traditionally, what's done in the Near East is, with this kind of concept of landscape archaeology, is that you would combine the remote sensing data, so something like we have in Google Earth, where we can analyze using geographic information system, GIS, the topography. We could talk about potential routes through the valley and up into the mountain range, from a sort of analytical standpoint of how the computer talks about terrain. We can look at the satellite imagery and potentially multispectral imagery in order to identify potential sites in the landscape. And then we will use that information to go out and do the walking survey on a targeted basis to see if, in fact, it is some sort of site. When we collect the materials on the surface of the site, we hope through the stratigraphy of the Veti Fortress, as well as comparative examples from everywhere around us, published stuff, that we could date the potential occupation layers of each individual site, maybe even get some sense of the use of the site based on both the surface architectural remains, if you can trace out some walls. Ideally, I'm trying to get a geophysics machine so we could even potentially do geophysics on some of these individual sites, certainly do a drone 3D model of the sites. And then, without taking the immense amount of time and resources it takes to excavate, although we could do 1 by 1 meter excavations of every site, I don't think we would have the time to do that. Try to characterize the function of the site, the purpose of the site, and the occupation time periods of the site. And then we'll have an ability to map things out. And so one thing that's going to help us with is this study of the militarization of the landscape. So if I can, for example, figure out that I've got, a fortress here, maybe this is medieval, but maybe it could have been used earlier as well. A fortress at the Veti Fortress, definitely going to have a fortress at this place, which we haven't gone to yet, and up into the valley. Maybe I can, use intervisibility analysis to, interpret that these sites are following a road, and that they're sort of trying to control that road. And if I could show change in position of fortresses over time between the late Bronze Age and the medieval, for example, that would be really interesting. If I could find, so that's kind of one aspect of the research is this sort of where's the transportation routes, what is the militarization of this region. Potentially, I could do a more intensive excavation of something of a specific site higher up in the valley. There are certainly known sites along this road here that our Armenian colleagues have already done a little bit of excavation on. If I could maybe compare the materials at Veti Fortress down in the valley with some contemporary material up at a higher site, then I could potentially get at some of these questions of differential interface with the environment from the highland region to the lowland region, for example, maybe even the same time period, which would be really interesting. So it's really all very challenging to do this kind of research, obviously. But we do have these are kind of things which have been done a lot over the last couple decades in the Near East. So we have a lot of models to follow. And then it's really about how good our data collection will be. And for example, whether we could get a LiDAR map of the topography. So this is ASTAR data, which is 25 meter, but I would love to take out a drone and do a 1 meter or better LiDAR DEM, digital elevation model of the whole region. And I've got one of my grad students is interested in doing that. So could he use that DEM to really study the potential transportation routes and potentially identify sites in the landscape through machine learning, for example. So we hope to sort of go in all of these different directions. So this combination of the large scale data sets with the hands-on survey and excavation as well. So it's a great question. Obviously, it's what we want to do. It's challenging, but we sort of push forward and try our best to see how far we can get with it.
Well, I don't think I realized how much was already known. So that you can draw on a lot of other people's research or inventory at least. And the other part is, you're a Vermonter, so you know, but like where I worked was completely forested. So the idea that you're going to walk over and figure out, it's a multi-occupation site from the Bronze Age. It's like, oh, really? So I mean that's helpful. So you can cover a lot of territory and get us.
I tried. I was in Laos in December in Southeast Asia, and there it's a forest, forested, and just trying to find like one site. Like we sort of knew that there was a site somewhere. Somebody had published about it, and I ran up the forest, and it was getting late, and everybody else was far behind me, and I was like, I gotta find this site, and I couldn't find it because there's trees everywhere, and there's so many leaves on the ground, and so I can't imagine doing archaeology the way you guys do it.
Well, I retired, so that was one reason. Oh, thanks.
Good.
I was curious about the software that you've been using and some of the tools that you've been designing yourself. You had mentioned very quickly in passing that you developed an Android app for tracking exact locational data for your finds. And I was wondering, with a website like openarchaeology.org, whether your software tools were also going to be open source tools, or whether at this point they're just kind of ad hoc, purpose built right now for the project.
Good question. I am, yes, a very, very strong supporter of open access and open source. And therefore, I invite you to go to my GitHub page if you are into programming. And it's GitHub/Anatolian. So, because I used to work in Turkey, that's Anatolia. And I have apparently 8 repositories that are publicly available right now. Developed over the last 5 years, basically. The software I was just showing is called the Archaeological Survey Location Collector. I've tried to have the students who were working for me document it pretty well to give an understanding of what's going on here. It is written in the Android language, and I have a new set of programmers working for me here in Hong Kong, and they're thinking about using one of these global frameworks that would allow it to run on both Android and iOS, which I think is exciting. But this was done 3 or 4 years ago when it was still kind of one or the other. So these are, you know, kind of custom made, kind of whipped up little apps that had this particular one had two purposes. One was to be able to integrate the photograph with my data structure in my database and upload it to the internet. And the second was to be able to control and communicate with that GNSS device, that very specific GNSS device. It's called MLID Reach. And each one cost, I mean, now you can get one for about $1,500. So if you have two, $3,000, which is semi-affordable, you can set up a differential network. We did have some problems using the older version in Laos with the forest cover. This works great, of course, in Armenia where there's no cover. But the newer version is supposed to work better in the forest cover, and I just got some in December, and I was hoping to try them out in the summer, but of course didn't happen. Although I suppose I could try them here in Hong Kong, where we do have forests as well, but not really an issue for my Armenia project. So it has very specific code for communicating with that particular device, which I think is probably, if anybody's using this code, it's for that reason. And this is we published an article in Advances in Archaeological Practice about this, so people know about it through there. But yes, certainly whenever we're putting together wherever we're putting together code, I'm trying to get it published on my GitHub page for anybody to use.
That's great. So follow up to that. Curious about the data management that you're using, especially since in answering Dave's question, you're relying upon a lot of other data sets. Are there repositories of these data sets that you're able to draw upon? Or are you having to recreate all of that from earlier publications? And how are you handling those data?
Yeah, this is like one of the things that I find most kind of exciting about archaeology is the data stuff. It's one of the reasons I got into the field initially. And it's a challenge, as we all know. And now I'm working with a situation where, for example, some of the best data sets would be like Russian spy satellite, airplane spy photography from the 1950s or 60s. And getting a hold of that, since it's a new project, that's something we want to do, but we're still sort of at the early stages of doing. But we would love to get a hold of those kind of specific data sets. Right now, we are only, since we're at the beginning, we're only relying on the stuff that's easy to get a hold of. So first, for remote sensing, we have, USGS has the website, the Earth Explorer, and we're taking as much as we can from there. So the Corona satellite imagery and some of the other declassified American stuff. The grad student was out there doing that this week, just trying to collect all of these data and trying to get them geo-rectified, which is a challenge, which is itself a challenge. And then there is not much at all published about this valley in terms of like Russian publications or Armenian publications, because nobody's really worked here before officially. So the only thing we know about the site is just from local knowledge. I mean, I've never even found it sort of Veti Fortress referenced in a book. So we have to kind of build it up from scratch to a certain extent. And it is my goal over the long term to make this part of my website, to have, all these things sort of points on a map and then references to everything. I mean, like in the long term, once I get tenure and I don't have to worry about anything else, to actually, that's what I want to spend my time on. I just want to spend my time like putting together a data set that anybody can use. And my wife was starting to research she does historical periods. And so she was researching the historical travelers to this region. And hopefully we can map, where people in the 19th century and 18th century came and what they saw and what they talked about. The other thing I'm working on is a pottery database. So what I do is I take all of the publications from all of the other sites around us that have been happening over the last, 100 years. And we just chop them up and turn them into digital databases. And I was able to do this with my dissertation, to be able to automatically match a ceramic profile from my data set with publications everywhere else using kind of a mathematical model of the profiles. And so within, hopefully, if I'm really lucky, within this semester or next semester, I'll have this working for Armenia as well, so that we can take our 3D scans of the pottery we did last year, slice them, and then automatically say, there are 3 other pieces just like this, one from this site, one from that site, one from that site, so that it all happens automated. And so that's where we're trying to get to, basically. But it's all about the digital tools for me. It's all about getting it into the database and making it usable. Yeah, so this is definitely a challenging problem, and I'm kind of curious about what it's like in Vermont, actually.
We just lived vicariously through your your digital prowess, I think.
Yeah, I think
But there must be like, GIS data sets and stuff that you guys are working with that I don't know if they're state owned or federal, or, or they're just private things or whatever. I don't know.
I think between like the state and, at least the 2 federal agencies that I'm used to working with, we all kind of have slightly different data sets that we all kind of want to get to be, one data set at some point. The state has done a lot of work in recent years on trying to, to kind of make a standard for how federal agencies are reporting that data. But there's a lot of legacy data going back from like the 1960s, 1970s that's still just not, talking well with that new data set yet. So there's still a bit of a challenge to pull that.
So it sounds like the same thing everywhere.
Yeah.
But it is nice that we've got complete LiDAR coverage for this.
Yes,
That is
the
very
LiDAR.
That's pretty cool.
Wow. Is that publicly available, or is that like you have to be an insider to?
Oh, no, it's publicly available.
You can just download it.
Yep.
What's the resolution?
Depends on, it's not
Depends
everywhere
where
is really great, but it was partly because of Irene that they really started to
Oh, right.
Most of the states
show
either
it to you if you want to see it.
but I think are 1 meter, 2 meter for the LiDAR.
That's
elevation.
incredible.
It is incredible. Yeah.
You can see stone walls and cellar holes.
Yeah, very easily, which is great because of the forestation.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. They did this after I left. And then I go into and I'm like, oh my God, I could have done all my work in 2 weeks.
The state archaeologist, Jess Robinson, did just such an amazing job when he got in here to try and get all of the information into one mapping. And it's, like they're saying, it's 50 years worth of, God, I don't even know what all in here. So, we have all the sites mapped, but they're not exactly where they should be. Most of the sites mapped, not exactly where they should be, and they're not exactly. So it's so much better than it was, but it's still not, everything that we really ought to have, I can show you some of it.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yeah, that'd be great. We can look at that.
I mean, the state's GIS data are really helpful, and as an archaeologist, you can see the predictive model factors within the state's data, which is very helpful.
So what is blue and what is red?
So those are sites.
Is there a difference between the blue and the red?
Yeah, pre-contact are red sites and the blue are historic, but there's also green and other. If we're looking at the LiDAR, so you can see
Wow.
quite a bit of detail.
Wow.
And
That's incredible.
I couldn't think of an area I should go to first, but you can see like borrow areas and roads, of course.
So of course the
Field margins.
the military sensitivity of the regions we work in also make it a little difficult to obtain, even if the governments have this kind of data, for us to obtain it. Although I can't imagine that a military, if they need 1 meter, I mean, I don't know if, it seems like you can see enough on Google Maps today that there's nothing really hidden from the enemy.
I do think so. And I think there's, I mean, the Ethan Allen firing range is over here in Jericho, and I know for a fact that I can see archaeological sites there. So what are we seeing really, I guess maybe is the question. Are we seeing everything? Are they allowing all of that to be seen? I don't know how much of it we get.
Yeah, that would be my interest, is like how much, with, you know, with the US being a kind of private property positive environment, how much access can you get, and what can you see, and, you know, how complete of a picture can the state build, for example, about its past?
As long as it's free, we'll put it in the map. That's what we'll
Nice.
free, the right size, you know.
So it's a little harder for us then, I think, because of the politics in the different countries and the different languages and everything, but so it goes a little slower for us.
Yeah.
Speaking of politics, you mentioned that you think that this site could tie in to the Silk Road, perhaps. And we know that that's a huge thing in development right now. And I was wondering if your project is in any way tied into those plans, or you see a future there, and how it's being impacted by that push.
Yes, this is a very, very relevant thing for our project. The Belt and Road Initiative, I don't know if I have the picture handy, but there's actually some of the Belt and Road Initiative maps, you know, basically put one of the main lines not directly through Armenia, but close enough that it's within the buffer zone of that transportation corridor. And Armenia is officially a Belt and Road country, according to the Chinese government. So right now, the impact on that for us is, well, first of all, I put it in all my grant applications. I say Armenia is a Belt and Road country, so that's one thing. And then there are actually funds for undergraduates to come to Armenia. So some of the students have applied for that. I don't know if any of them have gotten it yet, but maybe next year somebody will get that scholarship to be able to pay for their plane ticket to come out. The next level is that there are roads being built in Armenia. There's a lot of infrastructure that was going on in the last year of building a new road in Armenia, and the companies that are doing it are Chinese. And there's a school in Yerevan that is teaching that is a Chinese language immersion school now. And so that's all part of the same initiative that the Chinese government is doing. And so we thought, in fact, that if we could connect with that school in part of the students who come out to our site, there could be Chinese speaking students, young Armenians, who then my students could speak to in their native language, or not their native language, but the Mandarin language that they all know. And then they could communicate that way. So there is a lot of connections. China is, I don't know, like kind of like other places in the world, kind of doing a more of an economic integration, and trying maybe to stay out of the political situation that is so complex there. You know, unlike Russia and Turkey, who are very much engaged with this political situation. So we'll see what happens, but it's definitely a part of our existence or knowledge, and will hopefully be helpful to us in the long run. But so I hope to stay somewhat engaged with this community, and just maybe attend events when I can, and see what happens in the long run.
Yeah, thank you so much for presenting and for sharing your research. And in a way, I'm thankful that we've had this global health situation to get us into having remote presentations, because otherwise we would have never made this connection. And I think that this is a new avenue for the VAS to really pursue, even among healthy times in the future. So thank you so much. It was great meeting you, Dr. Cobb, and meeting everyone else on the call.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter.